State Senator Frank LaRose is finishing up his first term here in Columbus, but he has developed a pretty strong reputation for digging deep into the issues and also reaching across party lines to get things done. We have a lot of interesting topics to talk with him about today, from redistricting reform to being a little bit more civil around the State House. State Senator Frank LaRose is today's Caucus Conversation. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today.
John, I'm glad to be here.
So one of the things we talk about here in the Senate, our top priority is always job creation, economic development. We talk about tax cuts and trying to support a business environment. But one thing that's really important about growing jobs in the economy is cutting red tape in Columbus. And that was something that you have been a really strong advocate for.
Absolutely. You know, our business owners tell us when we're out there speaking to chambers of commerce and touring businesses that there are from time to time regulations that don't make sense. We know that there have to be rules of the road that protect our environment, that protect the health and safety of Ohioans, and we accept that. But there needs to be a common sense test that's applied. We need to make sure that the bright ideas that bureaucrats come up with in Columbus actually abide by the common sense principles that our small businesses operate under. And that's why we've been working hard on regulatory reform, so we can cut that red tape and create a pro-business environment where private enterprise can thrive in Ohio.
Senate Bill 3 was a bill that you sponsored. It does pretty much just that, and it was one of our top priority bills.
Yeah, it was, and I borrowed from some of the good work that was done by the Regulatory Reform Study Group that actually was formed during the last administration, a group of bipartisan people, business owners from around the state. Talked to colleagues and talked to business owners, and we were able to come up with a comprehensive piece of legislation that addresses some of the concerns that exist as it relates to the regulations that our businesses labor under in Ohio. I'm pretty proud of it. We passed it out of the Senate in a bipartisan fashion. It's now moved over to the House, and I hope the House will be taking it up soon.
By the way, one of the things that where you got some of the suggestions came from the Joint Committee on Agency Rules and Review, the JCAR,
yeah.
Which I've talked with other members about this before. It's one of those entities that people really don't know much about, but it's extremely important, and you're involved in that.
Sure. I had the opportunity to serve as vice chairman and then eventually chairman of JCAR in my first 2 years in Columbus, and I still serve on the committee. It is one of those best kept secrets in some ways. It's a really good tool for the legislature to use to keep oversight of the executive agency rulemaking that goes on. Again, in the vast majority of cases, the agencies in Ohio are doing good work to make sure that they're protecting the health and safety of Ohioans. But in some cases, they go beyond what their initial charge is from the legislature, and that's when we use that committee to rein them back in, to inject some of that common sense, and to make sure that the rules that we're passing actually first accomplish the goal that they lay out to accomplish, but don't create unnecessary hoops for our businesses to jump through. JCAR does good work in that, and one of the things that Senate Bill 3 really does is it strengthens JCAR. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that Senate Bill 3 includes the creation of a website called Rule Watch Ohio. The fact is, when we pass a piece of legislation, it gets many public hearings, a lot of people get involved, our local media reports on it, and it gives us a chance to really vet the issue very well. Oftentimes in rulemaking, that doesn't happen. It's done in a state agency, very few people get to see it, and oftentimes the first a small business owner hears of it is when the state inspector shows up with a clipboard and says, "We're from Columbus and we're here to help." But what this does is it really crowdsources regulatory reform. It gets it out there for people to see. It creates an easy-to-use website where a pharmacist can sign up to be notified when the Board of Pharmacy issues new rules. If you're a farmer, you can sign up to be notified when the Ohio Department of Agriculture issues new rules. And in that way, you're not having to keep track of the hundreds of different rules that come out any given month, but you're able to focus in on your industry and watch what's going on so you can engage in the process so that we can be your voice when it comes to the regulatory process.
Let's talk about another issue here, one that's pretty big. It comes up. It comes up quite a bit. Typically in years like this, which there is an election later this fall. Redistricting reform. People from both sides of the aisle talk a lot about how the lines are currently drawn, how that process works, whether it's fair or not. There's a number of things we can talk about, but this is something that you've been tackling since you came to Columbus. Talk about some of the steps that you've taken towards getting redistricting reform done here in Ohio.
Yeah, I identified this early on as something important to work on. The fact is that every 10 years throughout our history, when there's a census, we redraw the legislative districts. We have a process in place right now that, for better or for worse, currently sort of allows one party to completely control the process, and that's been used over time by both parties and usually used for political advantage, and it's sort of expected that that's the way it's going to work. I think we can do better. I think that we can create a more balanced process where we draw district lines that better reflect the diversity of the state, that create more competitive districts. And so I've worked with a group of bipartisan senators to craft a very simple and straightforward constitutional amendment that would change the way we draw district lines and create some competitiveness in the process. So both the majority party and the minority party have a voice in how those lines are drawn. We passed it last year in the Senate, and I believe that's the first time in the history of our state that there has been a bipartisan effort to change the way district lines are drawn. I think it's in the best interest of Ohioans. As I said on the Senate floor, what we came up with is not good for Republicans and it's not good for Democrats, but it is good for Ohio, for our democracy, and for making sure that people's voice are heard in Columbus.
What are some of the highlights?
Well, some of the highlights are that we create a 7-member redistricting commission that would be responsible for both U.S. congressional district lines and state legislative lines. This would happen every 10 years following the census, and that in order to pass any set of maps, the commission would have to abide by certain principles, many of which are laid out in federal law, Voting Rights Act. They would have to abide by compactness, keeping the districts as compact as possible, abide by what's called communities of interest, and as well as an effort to make those districts as competitive as is reasonably possible. When the commission does their work to draw maps, they have to pass the maps with 5 votes out of 7. So there's a supermajority requirement. What we're doing is forcing consensus here, and at least one of those votes has to be from a member of the minority party, whichever party that may be. What we're doing is creating a situation where we're requiring that the two parties find a way to get along with one another and reach a compromise and do something that's in the best interest of Ohioans, not necessarily what's in the best political interest of one party or another.
How would this be different, though? Because there have been a couple of efforts at redistricting in the past that have gone to the voters and have been rejected. But where do those things fall short that this would not?
Well, 2 principal ways. First of all, those have come to the ballot through the process of signature gathering. By its very nature, those tend to be partisan efforts. One party or the other will get a group of people together to circulate petitions and put something on the ballot. We don't want to change something as fundamental as our redistricting process and only do it from one side of the aisle or the other. This is something that needs to be a bipartisan effort. I really believe that can only come through the legislative process. You're not going to see the state Republican Party and the state Democrat Party join forces to reform redistricting. That's just not what they do. No, and it's not their priority. Their priority is helping their candidates run campaigns and win, and we recognize that. But in the legislature, we can, and we've shown that it's possible, work in a bipartisan process to move a proposal forward that really is balanced and in the best interest of Ohioans, as long as we're willing to put partisanship aside. The other principal difference is that the previous proposals were really overly complicated. I called them Rube Goldberg device, that fancy contraption that seems to accomplish little, but they were confusing to the voters, and ultimately tried to rely on complicated formulas, and in some cases relied on this notion that you're going to find nonpartisan, unbiased people that are going to be willing to engage in this very elemental political process and spend 8-9 months of their life doing so. I just don't believe that we have any group of nonpartisan, unbiased angels out there that are going to come in and draw our lines. I think you have to recognize it's a political process. You can't take the politics out of politics. But what we can do is we can force the elected representatives that we have to sit down at a table and to work together as statesmen and women and find that compromise. And that's what our provision does.
Just about a minute left here, but I want to talk with you about something else. You've mentioned bipartisan a couple of times here. Mm-hmm. You're known for doing a pretty good job of reaching across the aisle, and I know that you're working with your fellow senator from Northeast Ohio on an effort to be a little bit more civil here at the State House. Tell us about it briefly.
Sure. Well, the fact is that in our line of work in the state legislature, our job, the reason we're sent here, is to solve problems. It's actually it's a really miraculous thing. We've got a building here in Columbus where a diverse group of Ohioans meet every week to talk about and hopefully solve the problems of our state. But the fact is we can't do our best work unless we're talking to one another. And that means that there has to be a basis for trust and relationship building, and that means that we have to be able to be civil with one another. In order for us to do our best work as legislators, we have to be able to reach across the aisle. The fact is that Ohioans expect that, and they should. We're working on trying to do something about this. It's a problem that's never fully solved. It's something that you don't reach a conclusion one day where you say, all right, we've fixed civility and we can move on. And so in some cases there's hesitancy and even skepticism about doing it. But I think that there are concrete steps that we can take to engage with one another and really focus on, let's debate the issues. Let's have a robust debate about the issues, but let's not be nasty toward one another. In so doing, we can do our best work as legislators, and I think that's what the people of Ohio expect.
Well, and there are issues that are going to be somewhat contentious, but it is probably fair to point out that close to 90% of the bills that have been passed in this GA have been bipartisan.
Absolutely, and that's an example of how things differ between here and what happens in Washington. Often, because of the attention that's paid to what happens in the nation's capital, people think that things are completely broken. But you're right. Here in Columbus and in many state capitals, we've been able to come together and work together on things. And there are times that we have our disagreements. And disagreement between the two parties is not a bad thing. Let's have a principled disagreement on issues, but let's not attack one another.
Well said. Thank you so much, Senator. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for joining us here. You can always keep up to date with us every day on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Ohio Senate GOP, or visit our website, ohiosenate.gov/Republicans. Thanks for watching.